Good to see you tonight. Good to have Brother Willie leading us in our opening prayer. I hope you heard what I hear every time I speak to him. That's like a professional speaking voice, and one that I envy and wish I had, but alas. Thank you, brother, for being with us, and thank you for leading us in that prayer tonight. We're very thankful to have with us also this evening Brother Chad Dollahide. He's now preaching for the Bremen congregation. Now, I'm curious, have you been preaching regularly anywhere before you came to Bremen, or is this your first full-time work, or Childersburg, Alabama, before you came to Bremen? I know you were at GBN. You know, they say that someone is your friend if they make you look good. I had people say to me, early on at least, when I was at GBN, you look better on TV than you do in real life. And I can credit this good brother, I suppose, for that Photoshop attempt. I used to go to Dalton, or where was that? Ringo, yeah, just above Dalton. I just remember the carpets, but we'd go up there and he would help me out and give me advice on how we could improve our video performance here. But I appreciate his work with the Gospel Broadcast Network and also his preaching now for our sister congregation. And we're glad to have him here tonight. He's going to be talking to us about the media, and won't take any more of your time. Come on down, brother.
I'm going to stand up here so I can see what's on the screen. I have a weird thing about that. If I can't see what's on the screen, it drives me crazy. I preached somewhere one time, and they had a PowerPoint. I asked them, did they have PowerPoint set up? And they said yes. And so I said, okay. And I said, now, do you have a screen where I can see what they're seeing, what y'all are seeing? And I said, yeah. We got a screen, and they kind of looked at me like they meant that screen. And so the whole sermon, I'm doing this because I can't do it. I don't know. Some people, I guess, can trust it to be there, but it drives me crazy. I was going mad the entire time. I would say, I'm not going to look this time, and I'd hit the little clicker. I have to look and see. So now, see, I can see what you're seeing. That makes me happy. makes it so much easier. It's good to be here tonight. I appreciate the invitation to be with you. I've known many of you here for a long time. Some of you just since coming to Bremen. As Patrick mentioned, I've had an association with him for some time. I wish I could take credit for some of those things, Patrick. Those were those other guys, man. They could. Those guys, I used to tell them. They really were underappreciated. Those video editors. I'm sure you remember Adam Vaughn. He's still working with GBN, and just some great guys with a lot of ability and a lot of talent. I was just talking to brother and sister Greg, Bob and Betty Gray a while ago. They know Tim Ward, a friend of mine, very well. He's gone up since I've left, and he's now working with GBN, and Tim is a multi-talented guy when it comes to anything related to video production or photography or anything of that sort. So a lot of good folks working with that. Every now and then I still have a privilege of being associated with them as far as doing something other than just lending moral support, but ever since they moved out toward Memphis, it's a little bit harder to do, and I don't get to do that as much as I would like, but very much supportive of the work that they're doing. We are talking, as Patrick mentioned, he told me our overall theme for the summer series is Understanding the Times. Is that correct? And we're talking in this session, social media and the internet, or social media and the World Wide Web. There's so much that could be said about this. There's so much that I would like to say that there's just no way we'll have time to cover all of it. I'm going to try to keep this very basic for two reasons. Number one, again, we just don't have time to cover it really super in depth. Number two, I realize that in an audience like this, there are going to be those who are very tech savvy, people that could make me look really silly when it comes to computers and technology. But then there are also people who are going to say, you know what, I can barely turn my computer on. My dad will call me sometimes and he'll say, could you help me with something, Chad? And I'll say, okay, Dad, I'll try. And he'll start talking about this, And one time he calls me and I said, Daddy, just tell me, what is it you're trying to do? He was trying to explain this. I said, what are you trying to do? He said, I'm trying to email a file. And I said, are you kidding? And I said, Daddy, I'm not trying to be mean, but you don't know how to email a file? And so we were going through this, and I'd say, right click, and he'd say, where's that? This is going to be a while. So, you're in an audience like this, you have differing levels. And it's harder to understand. I'm by no means a tech expert. That's I don't make any claims to that. I can fool around with one, and a long time ago I worked in that field, which has changed so much now I feel like I don't know anything anymore. But yeah, I know my way around a little bit. But you have to understand that for us younger folks that are I guess probably, I don't know, below 50, 60 years old, I can even remember in our house getting that first Tandy 1000 and how cool that was. And your operating system is MS-DOS. And I remember Windows 3.1 and what a change that was. And I remember Windows 95 and what a huge breakthrough that was. And I remember all those things, but it's kind of been with us for a long time. Some folks, I used to tease my friend Leroy Dedman. Most folks around here know Leroy. He used to preach at Bremen and worked with preaching the gospel for a long time. Leroy got really into that. He was above that age range, but Leroy just kind of embraced the whole computer movement, and he got to where he probably is better on those things than I am. But again, I'm going to try to talk in general terms because, number one, I don't want to get in over my head, and I don't want to get in over anybody else's head either. Let me ask a question I guess this would be for Patrick. What's our youngest age that's in here?
Middle school.
Middle school, okay. I want to, there's some things that, I don't know, time may not permit, but there are a couple things that I want to point out, and I want to make sure I keep it age appropriate when we get into some of the things that you deal with this subject. But this is something that is needed. As I study this, I realize we need it as adults. Our children need to understand these things. We need to understand some things about this as parents, and we need to, well, just to put it bluntly, sometimes as parents we need to get our heads out of the sand and realize there's a lot of stuff out there. And sometimes people will say things like, well, you can't shelter them from everything. I understand that. But you don't have to invite it into your home, folks. That's crazy. You cannot just invite this stuff into your home and think that it's just going to be innocuous and there's just nothing's going to happen. There are devastating effects on adults, on young folks, everybody in between, because of some of the things that are out there on the World Wide Web. And a lot of people get themselves in trouble in general, even just when you get into social media. So let's talk about a few things. I've arranged this. We're talking about the World Wide Web, so we're going to use WWW as our acronym. Is that right? Acronym? I always forget. Is that the word? Acronym.
Right.
Sounds good, right? Okay, we'll go with it. But we're going to use WWW. We're going to talk about why are social media and the internet so dangerous. And I'm not going to spend a lot of time. I think you understand. I hope you understand. I'm just going to say this at the forefront. There are a lot of good things that can be accomplished with social media, with the internet. We're talking for our time tonight, just because, again, this is a time issue. We just don't have but so much time. We're going to look at some of the dangers. Why are they so dangerous? Then the second W, we'll look at what are some of the specific perils. What are we talking about? It's one thing to say, well, they're dangerous. What are we talking about? What are some of the dangers that you run into with social media and the internet? And then the final W will be talking about some wisdom that we can apply. This is going to be as simple as it gets. The old saying, where the rubber meets the road. Here are some principles, everyday principles that you can put into practice that will help you to avoid falling prey to what has gotten so many people in our society and even in the Lord's church today into so much spiritual anguish. The perils of social media and the World Wide Web. Pornography comes to mind at first, but there's a lot more than just that people have gotten into and had to deal with numerous issues because of that. Let's talk about the first W. Why is the internet so dangerous? and again, this carries with it social media. By the way, social media, that's another one that's getting hard to keep up with because there seemed to be something different. I remember any Facebook users out there. I remember when that was the thing. That was a big thing for a while, and then I don't remember, what did I just say? Did I say Facebook? I meant to say MySpace. MySpace. That was the first thing, That was the first social media thing. And I don't know, it just seemed like overnight, everybody says, oh, MySpace, that's so, last year or something. And so nobody uses MySpace anymore, Chad. And then next thing you know, Facebook pops up. And so now there's Facebook, and then Twitter comes along, and it's, one of you young folks tell us, or maybe an older folks knows, how many character limit? I forget. 140 character limit. So if you could say something in 140 characters, and all of a sudden a new language was born, right? That people truncating words and finding ways to say things in fewer characters so they can get it into a tweet. And then there's Instagram, and there are so many others. So understand, we're using social media generically. A lot of these things are going to apply across the board, and again, that's one of the reasons why I wanted to kind of go basic, because then you don't get too specific, and it applies pretty much all across the board. Why are these things so dangerous? What makes them so potentially dangerous? Again, understanding there's potential for great good. You can get on social media, you can get on the internet, and you could talk about the Lord, you could defend the faith, you could work to evangelize people, all kind of things that can be accomplished for good. As mentioned earlier, I worked with GBN. GBN, even when we were still trying to get on television cable systems and be a 24/7 network on a cable system, there's still not nearly as many of those cable systems carrying GBN as we would like. But it's always been there, right there on the World Wide Web. You could go to gbntv.org, you could pull it up and click Watch Live. And so that's, obviously there's a lot of good that can be done. But here are some of the perils, the dangers that the internet poses. Number one, it's anonymous. There's no mailman, there's no paper trail. Back in the day, somebody, it might be a dirty old man, it might be a young person wanting to just, maybe it's curiosity, but you got to deal with the mailman's coming to the house, and especially if you lived in a small town, he's say, "Hey, what is this, son? Does your parents know about this?" And you got a lot of all that. There's no anonymity, but when it comes to the internet, it's anonymous. There's no paper trail. There's more of a trail than you'd think, by the way, when you get into some of the more in-depth things of computers that people know a lot more about than I do. But there's always a trail. In fact, that's how a lot of criminals are caught. But there's no paper trail. It's not a tangible, visible trail, and so it's so anonymous, and that makes it tempting. And yet, what are we told in Proverbs 15:3? The eyes of the Lord are in every place, beholding the evil and the good. In Hebrews 4, verse 13, we're told, neither is there any creature that is not manifest in his sight, but all things are naked and open unto the eyes of him with whom we have to do. When I'm tempted by the anonymous nature of the internet, I need to remember that God sees all. We sometimes sing that song, there's an all-seeing eye watching you. There was a preacher friend of mine up in Illinois, and his wife always told me that song creeped her out, to think about an all-seeing eye watching you. And that's not... it's a biblical concept, and it's not meant to be scary or to creep us out. It's meant to be a comfort to know that God is watching over his children, and that we are, as we sometimes say, he's got the whole world in his hand. In Revelation 1, we're studying the 7 churches at Bremen on Sunday mornings, and the 7 churches of Asia. And it says in Revelation 1 that Jesus has the stars in his right hand. That symbolizes his power and his protection. So it's meant to be a comforting thought. But I need to remember that when I get on the computer, that no one else may be around to see, but God sees. And that anonymity is tempting many times. But also accessibility. You don't have to have a car. You don't even have to have a driver's license. Parents, do you know what the average age of initial exposure to pornography is for young men? 11 years of age. That's the average. That means some are even much younger than that when they're first exposed to internet pornography. If we had more time, I could tell you a lot of statistics that we sometimes think of pornography as a man's problem. And by and large, it is. But in my research, it was staggering the number of females who had admitted, this is just the ones who admitted it, having a problem with pornography. So it's not just a man's problem. This is something that it's out there on the internet, and it's available, male or female, whoever would like to access it, it's there. And so the accessibility is tempting. Also, guess what? The internet never closes. You're never going to log on to the internet to try to go to a site, whether intentionally or not. You're never going to log on and it's going to say, I'm sorry, the internet is closed for tonight. Please come back first thing tomorrow morning. Wouldn't it be great if it did that sometimes? Maybe here's a man or a young man in a moment of temptation. Got to wait. And sometimes that wait, you begin to think, and this is not right. I don't need to do that. But the internet never closes. And so many times people, as quite often in the wee hours of the morning, they're surfing the internet and they run across these things or look up these things. It's also tempting and dangerous because it's affordable. Whether you're talking movies or magazines, those are things that cost money. Whether you're talking 900 numbers. Knew a young man one time, I say young, he was a young adult. But this man had gotten married. He clearly had a serious problem. But the man ran up, his wife, I think they did work it out, but she was about to leave him, but she found out he had run up over $1,000 phone bill calling 900 sex numbers. But the internet, you can look that stuff up for free. It's affordable. But you know what? This is another one where, just like the anonymity, you think it's anonymous, but the Lord sees all. Likewise, we say, well, it's so affordable, it's tempting because it's so affordable, and yet Romans 6:23 tells us the wages of sin is death. I have a sermon that I've preached many times. I wrote it years ago, and it's just one of those that kind of stuck. I liked it, but it's called Let's Go Shopping, and it's comparing life to a shopping trip. And one of the things that I mentioned in that sermon is there's a price to pay for every item you put in your cart, so to speak, in the big picture of life. And when you put sin in your cart, you need to realize you can't afford it. You can't afford it. Put that stuff back before it's too late. We look at the internet sometimes and say, there's so many things on there that make it affordable. Any old body can get a Facebook account. Oh, they say you're supposed to be 13 years old? You know as well as I do, there are numerous children that are on Facebook. I don't know if you're supposed to be allowed to do it with the parents' permission or not. Sometimes the parents know, sometimes they don't. But it's just so accessible and it's so affordable. It opens it up for anybody, and that makes it dangerous inherently. It's also addicting. Whether you're talking social media or whether you're talking just the internet in general, there's an addictiveness to it. And in 1 Corinthians 6:12, Paul says something there. He's talking about all things that are lawful. All things are lawful unto me, but all things are not expedient. We might be better worded to say, of all things that are lawful, not all things are expedient. It may be okay to do, may not be wrong in and of itself, but that doesn't mean it's expedient. And he goes on, he says, all things are lawful for me, but I will not be brought under the power of any. What does that mean? Social media is a perfect example. Because is it wrong to be on Facebook and have a Facebook account? No. It would be ridiculous and it would be anti-biblical for me to stand here and say, if you have a Facebook account, the only thing for you to do is to cancel it, close it, and repent. Well, that'd be silly, and it wouldn't be biblical, it wouldn't be scriptural. And yet, true or false, there are scores of people, lots and lots of people, even within the Lord's church, who are addicted to their social media. You and I both know that's a true statement. In fact, several months ago, I even told my wife, I said, I'm backing off of Facebook. It's crazy. I'm convinced that they have some kind of a little algorithm in place that keeps changing that little news feed or page, whatever they call it now, and you keep scrolling and it keeps adding new stories that you haven't seen before. Me and my OCD, when I would get on Facebook yesterday, I would check and look at the news stories or whatever, see what's going on with aunts, uncles, parents, friends, especially when you preach 2 or 3 different places and you got a lot of friends from each congregation, you see what all's going on, okay, you close it out. And then tomorrow when you look at Facebook, you look at everything that's new. And you want to scroll. Again, this is my OCD that my wife gives me a hard time about it. But I want to scroll until I see yesterday's stuff. Then I know I've got it all. I'm caught up, so to speak. Well, I'm convinced that they have something going on, some kind of little algorithm that you never catch up, because that's what I started discovering. I'm on there for an hour at a time, and I'm scrolling through, who is this person? And I finally figured out how to unfollow people on Facebook, But anyways, I'm going, who is this person? I don't even know who you are. You had a baby? Okay, great, congratulations. And you just go. Next thing you realize, what did I get accomplished today that is something legitimately for the Lord, or just something legitimate accomplished, period. So I said, I'm just going to back off. And I have backed way off on that, and that's one of the reasons why. It's addicting. I'm not even talking about some of the other things that you can get into, and we'll talk about those in just a minute. I'm talking about things, Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, that are not wrong in and of themselves. I do this yearly during the NHL playoffs. I'm a huge hockey fan. People at Bremen know that. I love hockey. My team perennially makes the playoffs and gets ejected in the first round. But for that first round, I'm on Twitter, and I'm looking, because I've discovered if you want to find out an injury update or something like that, who's going to start and who's not going to start, who's going to be the healthy scratch, is this guy healthy enough to play? It's going to be on Twitter before it's anywhere else. So I'm on there all the time. And again, this year I had to get myself, and I had to say, okay, it's time to take a step back. You're going to have to take a break. Those things are addicting, and that's one of the things that can make them dangerous. There's also another one here, ambiguity. By that, I mean accidentally ending up on a site that you never even intended to go to. In all innocence, you go to a site, or you think you're going to a site. Sometimes it's as simple as just a typo. Sometimes it's a site. I'll give you an example. This was when the internet was just kind of gaining momentum. I was a student at JSU. I graduated high school in 1995. I enrolled fall of 95 at Jacksonville State University there in Jacksonville. I lived at home, and I'm driving there. And now this would probably never happen at a university now, because there's so many firewalls and safety precautions and things like that. But back then, it was so much was just kind of open. And I get on there, and I was researching, it was something for a government class, I believe, or it might have been American history. And I typed in whitehouse.com. That was a mistake. I didn't even know it. I was researching for a paper, and it pulls up. That was not the White House's website. The government's website is whitehouse.gov, G-O-V. Now, that has since been corrected, and the government has shut down those other domains so that if you hit, I think now if you even type in whitehouse.com, it'll take you to whitehouse.gov. It's a redirect. But you see my point. You can type in something and not even be a person who's sitting there thinking, oh, what can I get into on the internet today? You can just accidentally land on something that have no business and would not otherwise go to. And how many people have, in a moment of such as that, fallen prey to the temptation? Next, it's accommodating of laziness. This one, it goes right with addiction. You got to be careful about this. Could you spend all day on Facebook, Twitter, the internet in general? Hey, Brother Patrick, we could do it with sermons. I mean, I preached a sermon the other day on the Romans road. I was using the book of Romans and talking about the plan of salvation through that, and it was actually one of our members, somebody had given him a tract, and it was a denominational tract. It was the Romans road, and I got looking at it, and I told that member there at Bremen, I said, this is actually pretty good stuff. But I said he left out part of the Romans road. He left out Romans 6, 3, and 4, talking about being baptized into Christ. And he left out the part about being faithful, not continuing in sin that grace may abound, Romans 6, 1 and 2, and on and on. And so I was preaching that, but in the introduction to that sermon, I was talking about Roman roads. And so I went to a website and I was reading about Roman roads. You know, next thing I know, I'd been on that website an hour and a half reading about Roman roads. Don't laugh. There's a lot about Roman roads. There's a lot of information out there. But my point is, if we let ourselves, we can just get sucked into that and again, you're not accomplishing anything else. And then there's more to life. One of the things that I say over and over again at Bremen is that the older I get, the more I realize life is about balance. It's a delicate balance sometimes. Is it good to work? Absolutely. Have some folks worked so much that they've ruined their family lives, that they've lost their children? Yes. That can happen to preachers as easily as anybody. Is it good to have recreational time, fun time, downtime, whatever you want to call it? Yes. But have some people done that to the neglect of working? Absolutely. And so we have to be careful about that. Look at just a few passages. I've got several of them here. I'm just going to turn to the book of Proverbs and read some of these. Proverbs has so much to say about slothfulness or laziness, however you want to word that. Proverbs 21, verse 25. The desire of the slothful killeth him, for his hands refuse to labor. Have you ever known somebody that they whine about what they wish they had, but they won't lift a finger? Because they're always doing something with computers, or maybe it's video games, but something where they're just, are they doing anything sinful in and of itself? No, not as far as I know, but just wasting time. Oh, I wish I had this. If I just had more money, if I could just get enough, I'd get a job, work. Sometimes we need to understand these things, sometimes without us even realizing it. They draw us into a pattern of laziness. And what's the saying? It's not from the Bible, but it's certainly a biblical principle. Idle hands are the devil's workshop. You better believe that's truth. Notice going on, Proverbs 26, verses 13 through 15. The slothful man saith, there's a lion in the way. A lion is in the streets. I can't go outside. I mean, it's dangerous out there. Modern day example would be, well, I'd love to go get a job and go to work and all, but, cars are dangerous. And I could have a wreck. There are all kind of things that could happen. I just need to stay home. I just need to stay here in the safety of my house. Well, we understand that would just be foolish. That's a person who's either got a problem or is just lazy. Goes on and he says, as the door turneth upon his hinges, so doth the slothful upon his bed, just rolling around the bed, tossing and turning. Laziness. The slothful, verse 15, hideth his hand in his bosom, and it grieveth him to bring it again to his mouth. Man, he's so lazy he can't even get his hand up to his mouth to eat. It's exaggeration for the sake of emphasis, but you get the idea. Here's a fellow who's lazy. You can go back to Proverbs chapter 6, and he says what? Go to the ant, sluggard, which having no guide, overseer, or ruler, provideth her meat in the summer, gathereth her food in the harvest. How long wilt thou sleep, O sluggard? When wilt thou arise out of thy sleep? Yet a little sleep, a little slumber, a little folding of the hands to sleep. So shall thy poverty come as one that traveleth, and thy want as an armed man. Don't be drawn into a lifestyle of just pure old-fashioned laziness. It's not good just to sit around and do nothing. Is it okay to get on Facebook or the internet from time to time? Yes, there's a lot of good. I just mentioned researching for that sermon, and there's other things that can be done. They're good things. Even Facebook, you can keep up with family many times or friends. Again, I said earlier, we've been in several congregations that we've worked with, and we've developed some close relationships with people there, and it's nice to keep up with them and see how their children are doing and things like that. It's wonderful. If I did it all the time, that'd just be laziness. So we need to be aware of that. And then there's this is kind of a catch-all category here, allure. The allure of the internet and social media. There's all kinds of sin, every sin imaginable. John talks about in 1 John 2, 15 to 17, the lust of the flesh, lust of the eyes, and the pride of life. These are the things that are not of the Father, they're of the world. The world is passing away, and the lust thereof, but he that doeth the will of the Father abides forever. The devil uses the lust of the flesh, the lust of the eyes, and the pride of life to draw us in. And he uses that, I'm convinced, nowhere more capably than with the World Wide Web. We need to be aware of that. We need to understand. This is one of the reasons why it's so dangerous. There's just a certain allure to it. Again, I think about 2 Samuel 11:2. Here's David. He walks up out on his rooftop. Out on his rooftop. I don't know why he wasn't at war like kings normally were at that time of year. But he innocently walks out on his rooftop, and a woman is bathing on her rooftop. I don't know why Bathsheba was doing that. She's not totally innocent in that whole transaction. And yet, David, instead of seeing that and saying, whoa, that's not right, and getting out of there, he looks and he says, she's pretty. And you know the rest, as they say, is history. That allure, and you better believe that same allure is present on the World Wide Web. We're not ignorant of Satan's devices, 2 Corinthians 2, verse 11. Make sure. Again, sometimes I just want to tell parents, sometimes it's in my own family, folks. I want to say, you need to wake up. And you need to realize what you're putting into your child's hands when you give them an iPhone or an iPad with full internet access. I'm not saying I know the perfect age for that. I'm just saying be aware. I don't want to cast a stumbling block before anybody, let alone my own child. We need to think about these things. Let's move on to our second W. The what. What are some specific perils? There are some specific perils, and again, there's so much we could talk about here that we just won't have time to cover it all. There are chat rooms that are still around. I realize these aren't as popular as they once were, but they're still around. A friend of mine that he went to preacher school with me. He was from Tanzania. He's since moved back to Tanzania. But back when chat rooms were still very popular, he was telling me that the night before he had been in a chat room and he had talked to some folks who were from Tanzania. And I said, Christopher, no, stay away from that. And he says, no, they're from my home country. And he's telling me all this, and it's okay. And then I said, Christopher, I'm telling you. And he says, leave me alone. I'm an adult. I said, okay. And he was very, very naive. And sure enough, within a day or two, his newfound friend from Tanzania sent him an email with an attachment, a picture. And I said, Christopher, do not open that email. Leave me alone. I'm not a kid. So finally, I just said, okay. And he opened that thing up, and he covered his eyes. He said, get it off. And I said, Christopher, I tried to tell you, that's a danger. That's one of the specific perils of chat rooms. And again, they're not as popular, but they're still there. I get emails sometimes that go, thankfully, to my junk folder. But I've seen these things every now and then. They'll find their way into your inbox. But it's, I can't remember the company's name, but it's a company. And what they're there for is are you married and you're looking to have an affair? Call us. And we'll set you up with the perfect person who is also going to be married for you to have an affair with. You think there are perils out there on the internet? That's what they exist for, this particular company. They're going to set two married people up so they can have an affair. The very idea. Pornography. You don't need me to tell you about that. I don't have time to get into what I was going to mention, but if you want to see some of this, I'll show it to you. But there's... I just have a little thing here about chemical effects of pornography on the brain. It is unbelievable, the effect that pornography has on the brain, beyond just the sinfulness of you're looking at someone who's not your spouse. Sometimes people even say, well, what's the harm in looking? I'm just looking. Sometimes people will say, well, I've even heard people try, I don't know if I've ever heard a member of the church say this, but I've heard of people saying, well, that'll help your sex life and your marriage. Folks, sin is sin. And it's never going to be helpful. But aside from that, you need to understand the effects on the brain of pornography. I wish I had more time to talk about that, but let's move on. Then there's gambling. A lot of online gambling. A lot of folks that were never tempted by pornography. I'm not fooling with that. I'm staying away from internet pornography. But they end up getting drawn into some kind of gambling site. And the next thing you know, they're gambling. And they're gambling. And they're gambling. And you talk about addiction. Gambling is an addiction. There's a verse, Proverbs 13:11 from the RSV. It says, wealth hastily gotten will dwindle, but he who gathers little by little will increase it. The idea of get-rich-quick schemes is how one translation even translates it. Gambling would fall into that. The addiction that so many people have gotten into with gambling. Just addiction in general, we talked about that. There's social media. Man, there's so much we can say. Again, remember, God's eyes are always watching. The eyes of the Lord are in every place. How many people have gotten on Facebook or social media and Miss So-and-so or Mr. So-and-so that was the high school sweetheart, haven't seen them in 15 years. And they strike up a conversation, and next thing you know, an old flame is rekindled and adultery results. Now, I know folks that have made connections with people from high school and it's been completely innocent. I'm not saying it always turns out that way. I'm just saying be aware, and we need to be careful. Paul talks about this, 1 Timothy 5:1-2, about how to treat older men. Treat them like they're your father. Show some respect, in other words. And I often tell that to my own children. Somebody that's older than you, show some respect. I believe even I'll be 38 on my birthday, and I believe I ought to show respect to those who are older than me. That's just common sense. But he also says you treat the older women like a mother. Again, respect. The younger women as sisters. And then Paul gives this qualifier, with all purity. With all purity. You treat them like that's your sister. 1 Timothy 5:22, the end of that verse, he says, keep thyself pure. Flee youthful lust, 2 Timothy 2:22. Stay away from these things. Influence. Watch your pictures that you put up. Sometimes people run off to the beach, parade around in less than underwear sometimes, and then take pictures and put it all over Facebook. Now you picture that. If you're trying to reach somebody and help them to become a Christian, and they stumble upon your Facebook page and they see you more than halfway naked, they say, this is a Christian? I've seen people claiming to be Christians and have it on their Facebook, I'm a member of such and such Church of Christ, and they got a picture and they're out with some buds and they got their beer bottle in hand, or can, or a cup. Or maybe they're out at a restaurant and you can see the alcoholic drinks all around. And I'm thinking, if you were trying to convert me, game over. Because I'm going to think, this is hypocrisy. Boy, sometimes people will post status updates. Some people like things that are totally inappropriate. Go and see a picture. Maybe it's something really immodest. Maybe it's something really just ungodly. I've seen it before. Members of the church follow some homosexual advocate, and they post things about how the government ought to legalize homosexual marriage, so-called. Again, are you kidding me? And you put on your page you're a Christian? That's a joke, folks. If somebody comes across that and I see that and you're trying to tell me I need to become a Christian, no. That's hypocrisy. That doesn't change truthfulness. Truth is truth. I'm just saying we've got to be aware of our influence. Salt of the earth, light of the world. Jesus talks about this in Matthew 5:13-16. Be careful what you like. Be careful of status. Sometimes people will get on there, and I've even seen it happen within a congregation where somebody will say, if you got something to say to me, say it to my face. Some people. And that's it. And of course, everybody out there is going, what's going on? But you know what? Anybody who's close to that situation knows exactly what's going on. And sometimes it's within the congregation, and now there's tension, and it sows discord. Use some common sense. Sometimes people are going on a rant against something. I've seen people do this in a matter that is Totally scriptural. Go on a rant against homosexual so-called marriage, but do it in such a way that they don't represent the truth very well. Just be careful. Understand you have influence through social media the same as you do face-to-face personal interaction. And then there's just poor stewardship. How many times have people said, I've been there, folks. I've been in this same boat where I said, I'd like to know the Bible better. I just don't have time to study. And when I did an honest evaluation of how much time am I spending on a video game, a computer, the internet, Facebook, whatever it may be, the answer becomes clear. I'm really just being a pretty poor steward of God's time, which He's given me into my stewardship to use. Think about that. And then finally, some wisdom for avoiding these perils. This is very simple. Nothing complicated here. It's just the acronym be safe. Number one, be mindful of the dangers. Be aware of that. Wherefore let him that thinketh he standeth what? Take heed lest he fall. 1 Corinthians 10:12. Understand it can happen to you. Sometimes people say, I'm okay. I know all the dangers. I don't need to worry about that. It can happen to you, whoever you may be. Can a man take fire in his bosom and his clothes not be burned? Proverbs 6:27. I know fire's going to burn. I'm not going to sit there and try to. Well, let's test this out and see. Be aware. Be mindful. Evade evil before the first step. 1 Peter chapter 3, verse 11, he says, let him eschew evil. Avoid evil, in other words, or evade, as we're talking about it here, and do good. Let him seek peace and ensue it, or pursue it. Avoid evil. Seek after peace. The things that make what God would have us to pursue after. Stay away before the first step. Romans chapter 12, verse 9 says, abhor that which is evil, cleave to that which is good. Before it ever even starts. Here's a good practical piece of advice. Situate your computer in a very conspicuous public place in your house. Young or old, do that. You say, well, I'm not dealing with that kind of problem. Great. Avoid ever dealing with it. Put the computer in a conspicuous place. What did Jesus tell us to pray? Matthew 6:13. Lead us not into temptation. How can I say I'm praying that honestly if I put myself in a situation where I'm tempted like that? Put it in a public place. That way, children, adults, everybody, you know. Apply the necessary tools. I will set no wicked thing before mine eyes. Psalm 101, verse 3. Job 31:1, he says, I made a covenant with my heart. Why then should I look upon a maid? Apply the necessary tools. There are things out there, internet filters and things like that, that you can get that will help you to control it for everyone. Covenant Eyes is one place. There's a website called Covenant Eyes, and they have a lot of good tools for safeguarding your internet. Fill your mind. Fill your mind with the Word of God. Thy Word have I hid in mine heart that I might not sin against thee. Psalm 119:11. Fill your time. Again, not being lazy, but being, as Jesus put it in Luke 2:49, about the Father's business. Stop and ask yourself sometimes, how long have I been on this computer? Is there something more productive for the kingdom of God that I could be doing? Sometimes people say, do people really say that, Chad? Well, they should. Christians are not to be like other folks. I need to stop and ask myself on a regular basis, am I doing what I can for the kingdom of God and for His glory? Fill your life with the right kind of influence. Evil communications corrupt good morals. 1 Corinthians 15:33. And then finally, entreat the Father. Come boldly into the throne of grace. Hebrews 4:15 and 16. God is going to make a way of escape for any temptation. 1 Corinthians 10:13. That doesn't say He puts temptation on you, but it says He's going to make sure there's a way of escape. James chapter 4, verse 2, the last part of that verse, he says, you have not because you ask not. Sometimes people say, I want to beat this so bad. I want to deal with this, whether it's I'm on Facebook too much, I'm on the internet too much, or it's a pornography addiction or internet gambling or whatever it may be. I want to overcome this. Sometimes we neglect one of the most powerful tools we have, and that is prayer. So much more that could be said. I know we're out of time, so I will wrap this up. But understand the times. A lot of good that can be accomplished through the World Wide Web and through social media. Make no mistake about it. But there are so many dangers. Let's make sure we're aware and let's take the necessary precautions. Remembering Matthew 5:29 and 30, where Jesus says, if your hand offends you, cut it off. If your eye offends you, pluck it out. You know what Jesus is saying there? He's not saying cut off your hand or pluck out your eye. He's saying you do whatever it takes to root sin out of your life and to follow God faithfully and go to heaven when this life is over. Thank you very much for your time and attention.